Hello, listeners and genies. This is Bob, the voice of Hidden Oaks, and welcome to our first season behind the scenes episode, part 2. Today, we're going to continue talking about the origin, production, and the pain that is the Hidden Oaks podcast production. Again, joining me at the table are Owen Swerkstrom and Patrick Marsh,
Hello.
the other creators of the show. We left off last time after speaking a little bit about the history of the podcast, some thoughts on Owen and I as writers, and then some character discussion. So today we're going to talk a little more about the sound design, music behind the show, some kind of mental illness background, some of the stuff that we highlight in the show, our wiki, and some other points. So thanks for being here again, guys. Pretending like we didn't just finish up the first portion of the show.
Thank you. We didn't just hang out on your deck for a while, and
It's been a decade later.
a great deal of time has passed.
We're also joined by Kerrygold Dubliner cheese and Wheat Thins tomato basil crackers.
When you hear me chewing incessantly, that's why.
It's delicious.
Bob spoils us with amazing cheese while we're hanging out here,
And cocktails, which
I'm still drinking. Patrick's going to drive, but
so I'm done.
Everybody else is done. I had one. Patrick got cut off, and Owen's he can do whatever he wants.
We're just parties and emptied.
we're still working on me. Yeah.
Today, again, kind of starting out, we are going to go into some of the sound design and the music behind the show. So how do you want to start this off? I guess this is a topic that kind of goes more over to Owen yet again.
Probably. So Dave Schwartz and I, we've worked together for years on, Patrick mentioned Chunky Milk Productions, which sounds like maybe there's something there, but it's just a few of us who really love making movies and really love the process. We enter the Minneapolis 48-hour film festival every year. So Dave is a friend of ours. He lives in Florida, so working remotely is no new thing to him, just as, me being a hermit and working remotely is no big thing to me. We each joke non-jokingly that we make a career out of recycling our material. And we, over the last, 5 or 6 years of working with Dave, he sent me a lot of possibilities for, does your movie call for this or that? And I've mined that extensively for use in Hidden Oaks. There are a lot of cues within the show where we want to convey a certain mood or kind of give a non-vocal identity to a character or a place or a theme, some kind of event where we'll tie in just thematically with underlying music, something recognizable. This kind of came to the forefront, actually, with episode 5, where we stopped in with the gas station. We decided we needed this kind of nexus place, story-wise, to kind of touch base with all these characters. And, my question to the group was, am I overdoing it with the sound cues? We're bringing in, the surveyor shows up. I play literally the surveyor's theme, the map theme. The agency comes in. I literally play this. I have all this music recycled from prior episodes. I don't want it to get too Peter and the Wolf-y with, here's the instrument that means this is happening, and a certain amount of that, of course we want to allow. We want continuity. We want recognition. We want things. We don't want it to be so inscrutable that you can't follow what's happening from episode to episode. But we also don't want it to be so obvious that, here's the cue for this again. This is getting boring. We don't want to be the daytime soap opera. Well, here's the villain theme. So it's been a balance. But yeah, we certainly have made a whole lot of a handful of themes and instrumentation and ideas that he's sent throughout the years, kind of purposed towards, it would fit really well here. One example of that was we brought in this Father Witherow story, the clergyman, pretty late in development of the season. We didn't have any idea of this character early on, but here I had sitting in my in my archives from working on prior 48-hour films in the last 5-6 years. Here's this file that Dave sent me called Religioso. I don't even know which year he sent it to me. I don't know what project he thought it might go with, but it sure made the church scene feel correct and real. As soon as I was finished editing that episode, Bob let me know, hey, if you're ever going to use that theme again, you run it by me first. I have specific ideas for how this theme is going to be used in Hidden Oaks going forward. So we have kind of stolen and accosted several of Dave's amazing musical works.
And then before I kick this over to you, Bob, I just wanted to mention that from my production standpoint with this podcast, I actually don't deal a lot with the sound cues or sound production or anything like that. So it's always kind of like I'm like the audience finding out what you've done, and it's really always
For sure.
It's really just fantastic and a great experience for me to listen to. And it's just a luxury too, as a storyteller, to have someone who will just go in and do the cues and do all these different things to make the sound so fantastic. So yeah, it's just great.
The other thing that I want to kind of mention, since we're on the topic of Dave and his music, would be, he kind of, there was a point right at the beginning when we started to look for a theme song for the podcast. It was after we were done writing, like the first third, at least, of the show, and we released the first few teaser episodes on Bob's Short Story Hour. At that point, we were still, like I say, looking for a theme song. And I remember a three-way conversation between Owen, myself, and Dave, and trying to flesh out like what we were actually looking for. There was the discussion about, I had heard it before, and so I'm sure some of the listeners are familiar with it, but the conversation about the sound designer for, or the composer for the soundtrack of Rocky, where he had written the theme song based on the information that the production team had given to him. And then when he learned what the actual story was like, my music doesn't fit this at all. And came back and rewrote the theme, which is what we all know of as Rocky now. Hearing that from Dave, and then also seeing his process and what it became, I realized like, this guy really cares about what he puts to our show in terms of music. And it surprises me a lot because here the whole time I'm sitting there thinking like, oh my gosh, we have to really like make this as easy as possible for what we give to this guy, because he's doing it for free for us and just like putting in his time to, give us literally originally composed pieces for our show. And that's a lot of work. And he's like, I'm not going to do that if it doesn't fit exactly what you're trying to put out. And, it's very heroic. Like we give this to him and he's like, I am going to work on this until it is exactly what it needs to be for your project.
It was to the point where for our first episode, he gave us, we sent him our first episode, our 3 stories, and he sent us back, here is your episode with my cues in it. Mm-hmm. He literally put his own music and his own mixes under each of the cues that we had kind of spelled out. Oh, we should have a forest theme here, a monster theme here. And he literally inserted all of that, which is way more weight and pressure on him than we ever wanted this project to be and would ever have been tenable. We couldn't have done that for the 10 episodes that we did. Yeah, the dedication that we talked about in the prior Q&A episode of the parts of ourselves that have made it into this body of work, he's doing no less, possibly more than we are, just pouring into, he really wants to make this work and make it match and make it feel like a coherent production, and the material he's given us. And sometimes on very short notice, when we were finishing the season with the elementals, we had 2 meetings where we talked about these elementals, and it totally skipped my mind that I need to talk to Dave about this. We need some elemental music if we want these to have the maximum impact. And I had put it off basically till the last minute. I don't know if there's anything you can do for us now. We're introducing these earth and water and fire elementals. maybe this needs to be season 2 stuff. I realize this is ridiculously short notice. He binged and he listened to our entire season after talking with me and figured out, okay, here's how they're using my music. Here's how the language of the show works. And he came up with brand new cues for each of these elementals. And we were able to implement them in the next couple of days into the final episode, into the series finale, which is still my favorite of our show. It just, I think we really brought it all together. And Dave's contributions make it sound as though we knew what we were doing, bringing it all together.
It's true.
Yeah.
And that's been my comment about him since 2005 when I started working with him on 2015, sorry. When I started working with him on Chunky Milk Productions. He makes it seem as though my little movies, like we know what we're doing. We don't, but he makes it sound, his music makes it sound as though we do.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, especially towards the end of the first season, we had set kind of a deadline for ourselves, and we had a structure in place for production that was kind of obliterated by the pace of production itself.
Yep.
And we were eventually sending stuff to Dave, like you said, like the night before.
It was
Hey, can you
just
make-"
in time.
Yeah,
to make it.
and he did a great job with it, and I couldn't be happy with how the music turned out. And I do think of Dave as like the Phantom of the Opera character, like in the background, like composing music and deep beneath the theater as we're working.
For sure. It's a funny so we talked about the theme. We got our theme for the show, what we open and close with. That music came very late to the process, and Dave's first suggestion, and we had given him very little context. We didn't have a whole show, a whole season for him to binge and figure out what our language was. We didn't know. We had no direction in this. We just needed something creepy to introduce this song in about 40 seconds. Go. We gave him nothing to go on, and the first attempt that he gave us like a dozen options, different instrumentation of this really interesting kind of involved melody of his, but it isn't what we were looking for. It wasn't what we were after. And after a few iterations, we arrived at, okay, here's the feeling we wanted. But that same theme and that same dozen instruments variation of the same interesting melody that he sent us, we used the hell out of that. I mined that
Right.
so hard. I slowed it down. I drew it out so that it was more dreamlike and more ethereal. And we used that all over. Anytime the underbridge was mentioned, or a vision, or some kind of dream sequence, we made amazing use of this basically rejected theme song from Hidden Note. So even the parts, even the stuff that Dave sent us that we didn't want was amazing, and we used and we reused and we recycled, and he has not sent us a thing that was not worth having.
Right. I felt like I had another thought, but I can't remember. Is it mostly the dream sequences that original theme song get used for?
I believe so. I'm trying to rewind through my head through all. I mean, we have almost 10 hours of material now that I'm trying that, we have put some of it to music and left some of it conspicuously absent of music and done this and that with. I think mostly I ended up calling it the Underbridge theme internally.
Sure.
So it had to do with the visions and the unconscious, subconscious connections various characters had with the monster, which was really amazing when late in the season, Patrick came up with this idea that Eddie, the son of the current generation of Placekeeper, would have a very different kind of vision of what this bridge was, a more sci-fi interpretation of it. And when we were talking about this in the meeting, and it was almost going to be a big problem for us that this sequence is going to be the same but different, I was like, you remember he sent us 12 different instrumentations of this same theme that we rejected, right? Some of those were very sci-fi sounding.
Right.
All I did was
great.
choose a different file, slow that down, and it was the same dream sequence suddenly exactly what we wanted, feeling, sci-fi instead of flat fantasy. And it's just been a joy. He sends you things that you might not even realize the value of until, months later.
Right. And I will say, like, down the line, this podcast would work out well with just being told like a story. It's still, I think, engaging enough as it is in terms of just narrative. And that's what I've primarily done on the short story hour. There's very few things that I've done where I've added Foley or dramatic soundscapes and things like that. And one of the only things that I have done that with is another work of yours, which is the Greenland Diaries. It is because of the work that Dave has done that have really brought this to like 2 or 3 levels beyond what we could expect. Not just the next level, but really beyond that. The music behind it makes it that.
Yeah, and for the particular sequence Owen's talking about, that's the Rain Has Come sequence where Eddie is driving home and he goes past Hidden Oaks and he has a vision. And like Owen said, it's more science fiction based, and we had a nice little pop culture echo to Sci-Fi Channel anime films that we used to be on in the 90s, especially the late 90s. And that was just kind of we'll touch more on pop culture references later, but that was kind of the direction we were going with that. And it was kind of, it was therapeutic to write about it for me, but it was kind of a problem for production.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of those problems that seemed like it. I remember you being hesitant to bring it up. Like I would really love this character to be able to have this kind of vision, but I'm afraid, our existing themes and kind of font of sound design won't really allow it. No, we're good. Dave had us covered from day one, and none of us even knew it. It's unbelievable how often some kind of serendipity like that of, we already set ourselves up for this kind of success has happened.
Right.
We've lucked out just an obscene amount of times over the course of this.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit when we get into like timelining and stuff like that. It's almost weird. It's like a sci-fi thing on its own, how much that works out.
It really is.
Do we want to talk a little bit about like some of the drama sequences and like Foley use and stuff like that?
Yeah. And so as we talked about before, I've done some short movies. I've done a little bit of dialogue and direction, and kind of tried to find my feet as a director and producer of short movies, where you need to be thinking about the whole picture. And are you telling the story visually, and are you telling it through how your characters interact, and all of this stuff that only translates loosely to an audio only format, but it stays relevant. And I mentioned this in our season introductory behind the scenes. Initially, I was writing sight gags into our radio dramas. I was writing stuff that would play great if there was any kind of image corresponding to this. So I needed to sort of mold my own. And it's not as though I'm some experienced filmmaker either, but that's the kinds of work I had done before, and it took a little bit of molding to really make that work. So our first drama sequence was The Agency, literally introducing the veteran and the newcomer agents, just kind of talking about how things worked. And the recording was with a friend of mine, Chris, who really actually captured the character very well, although it was a very different vision than what the hardened veteran character that we
Yeah, at least that what I had in mind for sure. I think it was more close to what you were imagining.
Oddly, it was actually pretty close to the guy I miss talking to.
Right.
So his delivery, I thought, was really spot on, especially in the second half of the piece where he really got into it.
Chris did a great job with it. Like, I mean, he was the character, and it was fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, so we had the performances both from Bob and from Chris, and it still didn't. We weren't able to quite visualize how it would work. So I added this traffic noise, and at the beginning of the episode, we hear the door opening and closing and the character getting in and handing the sandwich over. And suddenly, this piece that almost worked completely worked. It went from, well, it's kind of a conversation between these two guys. It's kind of natural to, oh, okay, that was it. And it didn't take a whole lot. I mine the public domain sound effects, and I mine the YouTube provided sound effects, and all of these typical things that a person will grab because, well, we don't need to pay for them. They're out there. They're easy to use. And we've gotten a lot of mileage out of very generic kinds of Foley. My favorite example of this was about mid-season. We have Eddie solving some block puzzles very quickly, some wooden shifting around the things and getting the thing out of the box, whatever, these puzzle boxes. The internet is full of weird things that I will never understand. But among these weird things is it ASMR? Is that the right? Okay, that's the right acronym? ASMR. People will have a reaction to these kinds of very intimate sounds, and you'll get this tingly reaction. And I don't personally have that same reaction, but there's a whole world of videos out there dedicated to invoking this very specific reaction to, and this was all block puzzle and sliding bits of wood and interlocking mechanisms all working together, and it was the perfect little bit of background Foley. I don't even have it anywhere near as loud as, say, the YouTube videos from where these came from. Boy, if you want detailed sounds of any damn thing happening in the world, it's out there somewhere. And there's things I will complain about modern use of computer science and how ridiculous things have gotten, but that has been a blessing.
Well,
I wondered where you got those, like, more than almost anything else in this whole season. I wondered where you got those puzzle box sounds.
Seriously, you look up ASMR for puzzle. I think all I said was puzzle boxes. It may have been some tangent I got off of from that search. I don't know, but it was things where the author was very permissive and stated in the comments, like, if you want to reuse any part of this, you go ahead. I'm very aware of licensing, and I don't want to hijack anybody's work and use it in ways they wouldn't be understanding of.
And one thing worth mentioning with Owen in terms of the internet is that he is a veteran of the internet, and he sometimes has a difficulty with change with the internet. So when we initially started our social media push, he was in charge of Instagram, which Robin took over and has done a fantastic job with. But he was like, "Why can't you share a link here? I don't get it. Who would do this?"
I maintain my position. Instagram, you don't allow URLs in your posts. You don't allow links. That is the oxygen of the World Wide Web. What the fuck? But yes, this is the kind of stuff that old me entertains young these guys with my old man rants and my things should be protocols and standards versus these locked up apps and bullshit that the web has. Okay, I'll stop.
Well, the funny thing is that you should apply your same idea from the first episode here, where somebody brought up the werewolf motif. Like, we're not gonna keep listening if you do that, and like, challenge accepted. Yet you don't apply that to your own, like, you can't use links in here. Figure out a way to make this bring popularity to your own page. Like, not challenge accepted. Give up.
Okay, so you present me with the modern malarkey of apps and closed off things and ask me not to take that as just another challenge. Okay,
right,
fine. But the world already solved those problems 30 years ago, and we refuse to use the correct tools for the job. It really is annoying. But no,
can you hear the echoes of the surveyor right now, audience? Can you hear the surveyors speaking?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, it's funny. There's something on here about the peak complexity of cartograph and exchange specifically when it came to like the drama sequences. That was your...
That's true. I added things that we should talk about on the wiki, and now I'm the one that's got to talk about them. So
It sucks when that happens.
screw you, me. But yeah, so in a lot of our earlier episodes that were radio dramas that were dialogue intensive, well, first of all, an episode was just dialogue or was just narrative. It wasn't mixed, and we decided, no, let's mix it up later. Let's have some bits that are narrative and some where people are directly talking to each other. That'll be fine, which is good. I love that we play with the format. I always, I have nobody to blame but myself when we come to some sequence that I wrote where we talk about, check the cupboard and check the cabinet and do all this. And well, why did I write that? Now I need to add Foley for all this shit. what? So it's, it's fun stuff, and hopefully it's immersive. Hopefully it's something that people enjoy and it isn't overly corny and cheesy. And I alluded to this in some of the final lines of the series finale. It was like, sometimes people just need some cheese. Why not enjoy it? But
We're eating cheese right now.
Yes, at the moment I'm digesting cheese. Yeah, it's. I hope it comes across as another form of honesty rather than some mechanism we're using to artificially drum up a emotional response that honestly, that isn't what we're doing. We're not that clever. We're just being honest. We're saying this is our experience. This is the story we have to tell. And we're just, all of us, giddy when people react to it. We're just thrilled when somebody connects or calls us a bastard for killing off a certain character, or like that means the world to us when people care about this stuff.
It is incredible how much feedback we've gotten on this project. I have not ever as much creative work as I've done in the past. I've never gotten as much as we have with this.
And we are that clever. Just a heads up.
Poor Patrick was shaking his head. I'm that clever.
Planned
Speak
it out
for
all
yourself.
along. It was all part of the plan.
I'm not that clever. Anything that I write that you relate to is a happy accident. Patrick does it on purpose. I don't know what I'm doing.
We do believe in happy accidents here. We're Bob Ross fans.
In season 1, we depended on them.
I have my Bob Ross underwear on right now. It's not even a joke.
That's a topic for another podcast.
Owen, there's a note that you're not an actor.
This is true. Anybody who's ever worked with me on anything, you guys should be the first to acknowledge I am not an actor, but I was recruited to be the voice of the failure father character, the guy who's not good at anything. So, that always feels great. Honestly, my bullet point of Owen is not an actor is completely true, and you can hear it in my voice right now. But when I wake up in the morning, I can't stay here anymore. I've got to go. We've got things to do. This is not me impersonating Solid Snake. This is me.
Yes.
Like I haven't had any beer today. I haven't had it. I haven't this is my system not working right because I'm waking up. And so I would make it a point on both episodes where I was quote unquote a voice actor to record this early when I was very out of it and very grumpy. These two will tell you how grumpy I can be. Just kind of, okay, I got to be this sort of pathetic character who his whole life has failed to maintain balance and would make a terrible father and all of these things which are incidentally true of me. And, in that sense, you guys were very good casting directors and also fuck you. But I enjoyed playing the character, and I was also very glad that, okay, he's gone now. He's dead.
Yeah, when we
Sure.
thought of a neglectful father, we just immediately zoned in on Owen. We were just like, it screams Owen.
Somebody that's bad at their job, doesn't like to be around people. Okay, yeah, sounds like
Owen.
Can I be done talking for a while now?
no, actually, we talked about the Foley usage already, but there is a clip that we put together, or we as in Owen, put together about the creation of the monster voice. I guess that's the only other sound design piece here. Do you have anything to say before we go to that clip, Owen?
We talked about this as kind of a talk show, setting up a clip, and no, I think it speaks for itself. Go ahead and roll it. For the voice of the monster on Hidden Oaks, we start off with Robert's performance of the lines.
I do not suffer you to share my home.
I make a copy of that and pitch it way down.
I do not suffer you to share my home.
To this low-tone version, I add some reverb.
I do not suffer you to share my home.
And when that is played together with the original,
I do not suffer you to share my home.
it's a bit overpowering, so I mix it down a bit.
I do not suffer you to share my home.
Already, we're pretty close to what the voice sounds like, but we wanted some animalistic and natural elements in the voice as well, so I have a handful of actual animal grunts and noises that I mix in. I find some bits of that vaguely match up with the lines being delivered. In this example, I use and then layer them in.
I do not suffer you to share my home.
And again, we don't want the animal part to overpower the words, so I mix those down quite a bit.
I do not suffer you to share my home.
Finally, I add some wind. But I slow that down to about a quarter speed, then shape its volume to rise and slowly fall, again vaguely along with the words.
I do not suffer you to share my home.
All of those pieces together with their levels adjusted, and we have the voice of the Hidden Oaks monster.
I do not suffer you to share my home. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean,
They're looking at me like I should say more.
well, it's your project.
It is. What do you, I guess, do you have anything to add?
I remember the process where I kind of did the first pass of, the first episode where the monster finally spoke, the flashback with the father's father and all this. And I remember being pretty nervous about it. It as you heard, it's a fair amount of work. It's not okay, I send it through this filter, then this one, and I'm done. It's a lot of manual fidgeting around. And I sent it to these guys and said, is this what you had in mind? Is this what you wanted for your monster to sound like? And Patrick, what did you say to that?
Oh, it was great. I couldn't have asked for anything more. When I heard it, it was like a moment of my life because I've been writing about monsters for forever. It was just so wonderful to hear it. You did such a great job with it. I only want to mention to the audience that there's a lot of work that goes into Owen producing the monster voice. So when I told him recently that one of my stories had a ton of monster dialogue, he kind of went, "Oh God, I don't know about that." So yeah,
My grumpy self certainly showed through, but I love doing it. It's for the manual fiddling that it requires. I love how the monster sounds, and we really take Bob's performance as a base and turn it into this kind of haunting image. I feel like it kind of touches me each time I hear it, even though I'm the one who put all these layers in. It hits me just right, and I hope that isn't just me. I hope it hits everybody as, wow, this is something that we should be listening to carefully because they could ruin our day.
Yeah, I feel the same way. The inspiration on my end from kind of what I was I don't. It doesn't come across much in the actual presentation of the monster, but the idea behind like the cadence of how I use the monster voice comes from Q from Star Trek, like the John Delancey.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more kind of sing-song and
see
playful. It's not like just a malevolent, being or whatever. It's that. The other thing that led me to was, oh yeah, and this isn't on the list, but it was really fascinating for me when we did task you with like the really difficult dialogue sequences, and then you came back to us with it was both the agency sequence and then the come home sequence, where you were like, wow, I just wrote this dialogue, and like you and this other person, whether it was me and Chris, me and Robin, made it seem real and come together.
That's absolutely true. And what I said about Dave's music making it seem like we must know what we're doing, that was absolutely true of the dialogue sequences, both with the agency, where all I did was make it seem like one person was in the passenger seat and the other was in the driver's seat, just a little bit of panning and a little bit of traffic noise, and suddenly it worked. It was a real performance. And when Robin came in and played the sister's part, as somebody who has directed short movies, I was completely blown away. She gave us a performance, and I whenever I gush about this, I feel like, well, I probably should give Bob all the same credit because he's played all the parts up until now, and
true.
I should be just as equally appreciative of all he does, and I am, and I mean that. He's an amazing performer. But then this unknown quantity comes in. Robin comes in and reads off the sister's lines, and I couldn't believe it. I didn't feel like I was hearing the same piece that I had written. It seemed like, no, this was orchestrated by somebody who had a clue. This had to have been arranged by somebody who had some idea of what they were doing, not me. And when she would hit the emotional lines in her dialogue, and she just her delivery was such that wow, did I write that? Wow, that's really good.
She really made it real. It was incredible. She's by far the best actor, I think, in the whole production.
She's an amazing actor, and the chemistry exhibited, the back and forth, and I barely had to. I always adjust the timings just a little bit. I'll have somebody interrupt each other or give a little bit of dramatic pause or just a little bit, but honestly, especially in that first piece, the over the phone, I'm not coming home piece, I was blown away. I couldn't believe the performance that I got from both Bob and Robin. Just amazing. And I think we've all felt like that. We've all three of us, and really it's 4 or 5 of us. So we've talked about Robin and Dave and the people who aren't part of this roundtable discussion, but everybody's contributions have been so delightful to all the rest of us that it really is a privilege to be part of this. It feels amazing to throw something out there, whether it's just a line of dialogue or some, and get so much back to get this amazing polished thing at the end that feels like, well, I never could have achieved anything like this on my own. It's a great feeling.
That being said, is there anything to say about the original dialogue sequences in Agency, Come Home, Awake, where they're exploring the house? They were all pretty much recorded in sequence, where there's 2 of us acting, we're interacting with each other, doing the lines back and forth. But after that, that completely devolved. I think every scene beyond that was recorded with just individual tracks of lines, where like it went into, I think it was Cartograph, where I'm multiple characters, and so then can't be recording. Well, I could record them at the same time, but it's too difficult to switch between the voices.
Yeah, right. As an actor, you could never do that.
Yeah. And so you were just sent these individual, completely separate lines that don't line up with anything.
Right.
How did that go?
I mean, so those were those were the absolute crunch episodes for me. And I can't give enough credit to you, Bob, for pre-editing most of what what is sent in. I'll be handed a story that has already had all the little pauses and any ums and anything that you might record that you don't want in there. It's all been taken out expertly, and I can't even tell where the edits are, and it's amazing. But these dialogue bits, it'll be sometimes it's seriously just a succession of lines from each character, and okay, it's up to me to shuffle them together and make it sound like a natural conversation. But the talent so far has been so good, and there have been my favorite example of all of this has been listening to Bob and Robin recording, and I'll hear in the background the other gives a little line of direction. Oh, say it one more time this way. And that's exactly what I would have said. And they've each done it to each other. And I like, really? That came up organic, and yeah, the next take will be absolutely perfect, and that's what I use. Like I did no better when Chris came to my house and recorded his final lines for Agent Mattson. In fact, a lot of time when he would deliver the line the first time, and I would give him direction and he'd do it again, I'd use the first one. He nailed it the first time.
Yeah, and I just wanted to quickly mention that when we first started kind of assigning stories to people, we gave Owen all this dialogue, and I kind of put like a bit of, I don't know, fear in him where I was like, dialogue's really hard.
It is.
And I went to school
He is
for
not
it.
wrong. Dialogue isn't easy.
I went to school for English and creative writing, and I spent a lot of years working on dialogue. And you got to watch out for it. And he was like, okay, all right, yeah, and he could not have done better with it. Mm-hmm. And it was just funny that, instead of being like, you can do it, I believe in you, I was like, Owen, it's hard work. And truly came out really good.
Well, and so this might be the upside of using complete amateurs like Bob and myself as your co-writers. We didn't know what we were stepping into. You asked me to write this character that you had this preconceived idea. Sure, why not? You asked me to write some dialogue. Oh, okay. I don't know how difficult that is. I'll do that. Honestly, that's a really good way to start doing something. And as long as you have this support structure that we've built for ourselves, this kind of, let's tweak this and that. You've repeated okay about 100 times in this dialogue. Let me change that as we're performing it. That was me writing the word okay a million times, and Bob and Robin fixing it.
It was right. You said right.
Right.
A ton of times in the hospital.
Right. A million times okay, right. But we lean on each other, and we know, like, okay, this person will get the guts of it right, and we'll in fact, Patrick trusted us, having no reason to trust us, knowing that I'm sure he'll come up with something we can work with, and we worked with it. We made it work.
Well, I had previous experience with you kind of creating narrative, so I knew that there was some baseline. This sounds cruel, but competency with narrative, both of you. So I knew that we'd probably be okay no matter what, because you'd both been around storytelling for so long.
You're a forgiving guy, because your experience with me was taking all the lines you'd written and cutting them all.
Well, and that happened, by the way, in the Chair, which was a short film we did together, and that actually won top film for 48 Hour Film Festival.
That's true.
And was represented in Minneapolis at Amsterdam in 2020, right before the apocalypse.
We went to Filmapalooza right before the coronavirus changed the world. And yeah, it was still Patrick's writing, even though I cut most of his dialogue. It was his his expertise at story structure and conveying to the audience what the hell is going on. Combined with just having fun with Mike and some puppets made out of junk. It's really trippy to me that anybody appreciates that movie, but it was fun.
I like it. The next thing on the list, unless anybody has anything else about audio stuff.
No, I'm tired of talking. You guys take over.
Is the it goes more into some big points through our entire narrative and everything, but it starts out with the arson in Loris Nobilis, which you brought up, Patrick.
Yeah. So, Loris Nobilis was a story I wrote about Aubrey's father. And again, spoiler alert, Aubrey is dead at this point, and her father is kind of left rudderless, which he has been for a while since his wife died. But these earwigs show up at his house to kind of cheer him up in their own sort of way, and he simply can't handle the grief of what he's going through, the damage, and he ends up killing himself and burning the house down. And bringing up the topic of suicide, mental illness was something we as a team thought was really important in terms of our narrative. We showed this side to people that was realistic, that was respectful, and was well intended. And for her father killing himself, that comes from a personal antidote for me. In January of 2013, I actually attempted suicide. I drove to the High Bridge in South St. Paul, and I attempted to jump off of it, but luckily I did not. One of the factors that prevented me from doing that was I had a dog in the backseat of my car that I had forgotten about. It was my own dog named Millie, and I realized that if I jumped into the river, that she would probably freeze to death in my car, or I didn't know what would happen to her. So that responsibility I had, that love I had to this dog, kind of woke me up and stopped me from kind of going in that direction. So talking about suicide, talking about whether to do it or not, and how that kind of ripples throughout the rest of your life is really important to us as storytellers. So we wanted to show that in Loris Nobilis and in Sedans. So it was, it was just a really powerful moment for me. A lot of the sensory details that her father goes through were pulled from my own experience, including the blinding pain in my wrist, where he talks about cutting his wrist open. That's something I experienced firsthand. How depression isn't just a feeling, but it's almost like a sensation in your physical body. Like you can actually feel it inside of you. That was another thing I wanted to talk about. And overall, I just wanted to kind of talk about how a person just feels in that position of wanting to end one's life.
That did you ever do any cutting or anything like that?
Yeah. Yes.
And it was that like burning pain.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like an attempt to release that. Yes.
Sure. I was just curious about that. I guess one of the other points that I want to mention, since we brought up the mental illness and some of the other areas where it's displayed, it really is. I'm trying to think here. If we think about areas that we start to address this, there's more than just those two. So there's the father of Aubrey, who has the obviously like crippling depression and has turned to alcohol use as like a method of like self-treatment for that, and ultimately ends in like a successful suicide. We've got the Derek in the Black Sedan story, who is a schizophrenic person, also alcoholic, also like former drug user, which is fairly common in not only schizophrenia, but many forms of mental illness where people try to self-treat with different chemicals. We've got Father Witherow has the history of alcohol use. Are there any other spots that kind of comes up that you can think of?
Well, for Aubrey, she obviously
Right.
has depression. One thing I wrote about with her is that she likes to go to the speech therapy class to kind of get affection from the female teacher that's there. And that's kind of her replicating the emotional stability that her mom might provide to her if
Right.
she were still alive.
And I think one of the biggest things here that we were trying to portray with all this, and in large part from at least from my own perspective, and we're all on the same page about this. Like we didn't want anybody in the story to be a villain because of some aspect of like mental illness issues. The one that sticks out the most in that regard would be the father of Aubrey,
Yep.
right? Because
Yes.
he's abused her. He comes off in the first couple stories as very removed, very neglectful, emotionally, and also, like, as we see, physically abusive. But then we show, again, this goes back to what we talked about in the first episode here, behind the scenes, of showing you a different perspective. And it's that this is a person who is going through and not handling well, not dealing appropriately with or coping appropriately with his own mental illness, and finding these other outlets for that, and how that can sometimes come out in people's lives, right? Not necessarily to say that he is or is not villainous, but is a complex,
Right.
person.
And I agree with that. And one thing we kind of tried to do with this story and these characters was to show that these people aren't too far off from. I mean, they're meant to portray people you might meet in your everyday life, and they're also they're not too far off from us. Like, it doesn't take much of a push to go in that direction, unfortunately.
Right.
Absolutely. I'm not a religious person, but I enjoy the language and there, but for the grace of God go I, right? It's any of these people are any of us, given the craptacular circumstance of what they've gone through and what they've had to deal with.
Yeah. And I think that we have, even thinking about it right now, maybe even recognizing aspects of this that I haven't before, but we've really explored some really different facets of how this goes. We ended up using, I hate to say it, but like we kind of did, we used the Derek character in episode 3 in Black Sedans to show how, why isn't the alarm sounded on this weird stuff? Like, why doesn't anybody go to the police? Why doesn't this come out?
Derek, for me, he's a central character, Derek. And you're right. It's why aren't others worried about this thing that's truly objectively worrisome? From where comes all of this complacency? Why is this okay? And these are themes that couldn't be more relevant now, right?
Right.
Yeah, like who would necessarily believe that if it came to light, even if it came like directly to the police or authorities? And I have to say, like, as a healthcare person, and specifically like mental health provider, I can tell you that I myself, and I've seen my colleagues be involved in situations where literally what is portrayed in Black Sedans is a real thing. I've been in situations where I've had someone who we've been talking about as a patient that we care for, describing their delusions or their hallucinations, and we say, this is patently untrue. These are the things that they believe, and that's not the case, and whatever. And then we find out later on that some of what they were saying, or maybe even a couple times, like all of what they were saying, was 100% accurate, real life nonfiction. That is what they were living. Yep. People who felt like they were being pursued and persecuted by a certain group of people. People who said that they knew this, spectacularly famous person that was going to come and help them out. Whatever the case may be, people who have been in that situation. And it has even happened to me after I wrote the Black Sedan story and portrayed that. Like, there was one day where I was stressed out, having a rough day, and I had one of my clients call me, and she was stressed out about there being literally cars across the street from her house that she thought were posing a threat to her. She recognized them as law enforcement vehicles, and they were doing a sting on the house across the street, but she also thought that they were like watching her and causing her some kind of danger. And I was not being very therapeutic in helping her with that. And it was literally when I took a breath and there was like a pause, and I realized, oh my God, like, you're being the cop to Derek in real life, to this real life person who's struggling with this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, for in that story, one of the most powerful lines for me, and this is something I've experienced firsthand in myself, was Derek had a sense of shame for what he was going through. And I think that's a really important characteristic for people that are in this position, including myself before, that you don't want these things to be happening to you. You don't want to seem strange. You don't want to seem weak. You don't want to seem any of these things, but you just kind of break down, and you don't want to to feel bad about it, but you can't help but feel bad about it.
Right.
And it's a reminder that we all, on any given day, especially in the bonkers world that we live in, we come across a certain amount of information that we have to dismiss out of hand, and a certain amount of information that we have to accept at face value. Nobody has the time to check everything, but accepting or dismissing, especially dismissing anything out of hand, anybody else's experience, anybody else's thoughts or opinions, is a dangerous road. It leads to the kinds of madness that we're living right now, where we wouldn't be experiencing troubled times if people would listen to one another, even when it sounds crazy, especially when it sounds crazy.
Going off of that, going back to the suicide and these stories, one thing that I knew with this setting of the suburbs that I wanted to talk about was that in the suburbs, growing up in this setting, is that from where I grew up, you didn't really talk about your problems with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was very hidden behind these big glitzy houses in this quiet neighborhood where people kept to themselves for the most part. You'd hear stories, oh, that person had this issue, that person had this issue. But overall, you hid your problems from you had to maintain a certain status. And that's why this story works so well in the suburban setting.
Mm-hmm. So that was a lot of heavy stuff, and not that we necessarily have to lighten the mood. It's certainly not something that we do, even though we talked about doing it with the story initially. But the other point that came up with the arson in Loris Nobilis was when you originally wrote that. And I think one of the first edits that we came to with it is like you wrote this scene and he goes out to the garage and he gets a gas can and he brings it in and he's doing his thing. And I was like, Patrick, there's no way that this guy could burn his house down with one can of gasoline.
And it troubled me that not only did Bob bring that up and put it on our internal wiki, but I also knew and agreed with, dude, a 5-gallon gas can, gasoline, it evaporates fast. It does all these things that Bob brought up too. And like, why do we have 2 out of 3 people who know this much about arson on our writing team?
Right. It was hilarious. The comment was, I'm both disappointed and happy that you don't know this fact, but you don't need that much. You need more gasoline. And I'm also happy that you don't know that to burn yourself up.
I'm comforted that the person sitting to my left doesn't know that about arson. And I'm a little bit freaked out that the person to my right and myself both know that about arson.
Yeah, they were very like, this is how fire works.
Which, this shouldn't be funny. Arson isn't funny, but we're both laughing, and that's
a
big part of this process. Is things that are, absurd and funny in their own way, and also, this is serious. This is dark.
Yeah, that was one of the heaviest scenes I think in the whole. Between that and killing off the father, I mean, 2 of the scenes that really hit me the hardest. So, right, but yeah, it was wrong. It was not one can of gas.
And we wanted to do the right thing. We wanted to do it justice. We wanted to not bring anybody out of the moment who knew for whatever twisted reason what we know for whatever twisted reason. So at least have him held a couple of cans of gas.
Right. And the change was made and all were happy. Yep.
Right. With that, I guess talking a little bit about the editing process and everything leads us into the wiki, which we alluded to in our initial behind the scenes or our how do I want to say, like the round table that we did before the season came out. But the wiki, that's where it leads us to. In my mind, I guess where I'll start this off, when I first thought of how the process was going to be working on this project, I imagined that we would just share Google documents of the stories that we wrote as we wrote them, and then eventually I would read them. We would edit each other's Google Docs through that program, and then that was it. there is an insane amount more information that has come into the background that needed to be documented and shared and everything. Like, and we still aren't even nearly there in terms of where this wiki is going to be.
Right.
But thanks to Owen, he created this wiki page on a private server that allows us to like do what we do and organize what we do.
And so this is where, old grumpy me is vindicated against, young go with the flow, you millennial types who think it's okay to be restricting of technology and just use the bullshit that's available to you. Nah, run your own shit. That's what I do. I run my own server. I have a private, nothing web server that runs for myself and maybe my family and people who I want to share, just random things that only people who actually know me would do. This is the kind of thing that not even going back to GeoCities. This is going back to old style web. Like I'm running my own web page on, say, the university web server. It's that kind of thing. I run my own nonsense, and I let these guys have access to my server. I run a little, I think it's a DocuWiki site on it, and we use that to collaborate. We use that. We post our stories on there. We post our notes to each other. We have fix-me's. We only recently discovered some features of this thing that I didn't know about. I didn't write this stuff. I just deployed it. Here's how to make a nice big fix-me graphic to show up to edit each other's stories.
Right, and the fix-me's, you see those, and you're just like, oh no,
oh crap! What did I?
What's wrong?
What did I mess up here?
But yeah. So we have a big, basically online database where we share information about how the story works, plot points, characters, arcs, everything. And it's really in depth. And for me, I was actually the old man on the internet when it first was deployed. And I was like, oh God, I don't know about this. Usually when I start a new project, I buy a new Moleskin book. I get a bunch of stickers and I throw them on my Moleskin book. And I'm like, that's my project notebook.
I gave him a login and a password to change, and he didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't either.
Yeah, we just kind of saved it, and I'm working on the wiki. But it really has been an amazing tool, and our project would not be where it is without it.
And so once we started talking about this and appreciating that, we really do respect this as kind of a source of truth for our story that we're telling, I maybe ought to back this up, huh? So I do back it up now. Our first few episodes, what you heard was the only copy of what you were going to get. But I do run it's not even periodical. I, by hand, when I think of it, run a backup job now.
Nice. Is it on like external hard drives or what is it?
Nope. It's still connected to the server, but it's unlikely to die at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, the wiki is intense. It's got like a full episode guide through like season 5. And
just imagine all this stuff you don't have access to.
Right. I mean, it's interesting, and it does bear like going through it a little bit in overview.
We kind of live off it when we write this.
We
stuff.
do.
We really do.
Some of the guest authors that I've spoken with, and some of whom are authors themselves, like Patrick, have been surprised at the fact that we know kind of essentially per season, like where we're going with this story. We know the main big picture arcs. We don't know how we get there necessarily. We don't have the little points in between, but we know where this whole project is going.
Right.
And that's what's kind of mapped out on this wiki. We've got like these episodes pages for each season, all the stories individually. We've got like character bios and backgrounds, and then like group bios and backgrounds. And then the timeline, I suppose, which might now need to have its own like segment.
Yeah, and one final thing for the wiki before we move on to the timeline, I just wanted to mention that we're kind of stuck between two schools of thought. Like we want to leave the writing experience organic, if you want to call it that, where we kind of go with the flow and take where, go where the narrative takes us. But we also want to know that there's specific character plot points in general that we want to hit as the story develops. So we kind of have to balance it out, and the wiki's a good place to do it, where we're like, okay, we'll leave this episode blank because we don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And I'll say that. So when we started the entire project and started season 1, we I hope you guys are okay with me revealing we didn't have a plan for this. We didn't have Patrick, you probably knew internally where the story eventually was going to go. But at least for myself and Bob, no idea. I knew I wanted to write about a person going crazy trying to map a place. Bob knew he wanted a person unable to stop jogging. That was about it. That's where we started. And so the development of season 1 was really by the seat of our pants. It was, we began with about 1 to 2 episodes worth of padding in terms of we have this ready to launch before we go. And by mid-season, we had eaten up our buffer. We were just by the seat of our pants able to release the next episode by when it needed to go out to all of the podcast middlemen. I don't know what those are called.
Like this through the syndicate.
The syndicate, yeah.
Yep.
I feel like I'm talking Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, the Orion Syndicate. So this was all reason, and as of right now, and I hope, again, that you don't mind me revealing this, we have a giant outline for season 2. We know what major plot points happen when. It's both adding pressure to us and taking pressure off, in that it is giving us new tools to explore the development of each of our storylines within this big macro story. Patrick is amazing in terms of being able to keep a macro story and a micro series of stories in his head. Mm-hmm. And Bob is amazing in terms of being able to make those not conflict with each other, which Patrick and I are terrible about. We'll write ourselves into corners all the time.
That correlates well into the timeline.
And Bob will save our asses in terms of, well, this has to happen before that, you realize. Oh, right. So we do have an official timeline, although I don't expect anybody to be able to deduce it from season 1. Season 2 forward, we've said both. This is going to be a lot more linear. We're not going to go jumping back and forth in time so much.
We said that.
Yeah. And by the way, season 2 will start in the 1800s.
Okay. Yep.
Take it away, boys.
Yep. So, Bob, you got to save that.
What?
I said, Bob, you got to save that one.
Save that one.
Jump into your timeline stuff.
The timeline stuff. So I will say, for anybody, this is kind of a listener thing here. If anybody that's listening has a problem with the timeline, if there's anything, if you're just somebody that goes just into the super minute details and you think you've got it figured out and something doesn't work out, let me know, because there is literally a day-by-day timeline from like the 1950s, like 1954.
Stories we have not told yet.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Up until August of 1999 of what's going on. So let us know, and if you want to have a conversation about those like just minutiae, I am more than happy to share with you kind of how that stuff works out. That being said, again, the season 1 arc, just because of the fact that we didn't necessarily know how everything lined up side by side beyond episode 5, there was a little bit of disjointed kind of back and forth in time presentation of those stories. Moving forward, it will be much more linear. That being said, not necessarily. So
we'll try. Honestly, we did enough research that every story we presented does have its time slot in our continuity. Someone can check details like phases of the moon, or this was a weekend, or we paid enough attention to detail to get away with those kinds of things. And when I say we, I generally mean Bob.
Yeah,
cleaning
Bob
up after the messes that myself and Patrick made.
Yeah, that's true.
and just generally being that attentive to detail. And I sent him a link to here's a calendar of phases of the moon. Is that helpful? Yeah, that actually enters into our stories.
Yeah.
It is incredible how many times like some, random event that we have happening just correlates with just some amazing, lunar phase, or like the solar eclipse mentioned at the end of season 1 was a real 1999 thing that happened just a couple days
by dumb
after the
luck.
story.
We got very fortunate.
It's incredible.
Although I also knew like that's when Eternal Darkness came out around 2000, and that was I was way into that. This will shock people to know I play a lot of video games, but yeah, that was a big one for me, and yeah, that made kind of a big deal about the alignment of planets and all of this stuff. And the Silicon Knights, back when that was a thing, they did a similar amount of research in making sure, hey, this lines up with real world events. Let's have fun with this. Let's make this creepy as hell.
The reason why that ended up happening too is just because I don't necessarily know if it's my attention to detail or if it's just the fact that I read these stories so many times, because I'm either writing them or editing them once or more than once.
That's his nice way of saying Patrick and I don't review our work.
No, not at all. No, it's just that, but then I have to practice them, recite them, edit them. I mean, I hear this stuff a lot, and so the things just stick with me where I'm thinking about this, day by day. Like, oh, okay, the plane disappeared here. The surveyor went living in the park here. That would be the same time that Aubrey got bit by the cat. Okay. Oh, wait. This doesn't work out.
We've really been fortunate because, just logistically, Patrick and I are kind of the storyteller who would let that stuff go, and Bob is, to our great delight, the kind of storyteller that wants to make sure that stuff actually could have happened.
Right.
And we love that, and we absolutely abuse his ability to make sure that can be the case in our stories.
Yeah. Owen and I, we tend to just be like, well, it'll work out. And Bob will be
does.
like, well, it's
because of lots of work.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's got to work out. And he's like sweating underneath a candle late at night, looking at many papers.
I'll write something. Oh, this could happen anytime. And Bob's like, well, technically, sure, but also, fuck you. Except he's way more polite. He would never.
Yeah, he would not say that. He would be like, well, just to give you a heads up that it's not going to work out.
Oh, Patrick, why did you say this happened 9 days after this other thing?
Why did you make it so specific?
Sometimes when we actually when we write the pieces, we'll leave a little parentheses and be like, I don't know if this works, because
Bob,
please
Bob
fix
will
this. Yeah, Bob, tell me how much time has passed.
We offload it. Like, oh yeah, a week ago I heard from Bob, please fix this reference. We don't even look it up. It's on our own wiki, and we don't look it up. We leave it to Bob.
Yeah,
I'm just like, please just say some time passed.
Yeah, some time passed.
Why
That's
be
true.
specific? Oh man. Yeah, let's see. I think that's. Oh, I did have something else with the timeline, but it's gone, man. I would like to just use this time, maybe each of us individually talk for a second about what we want to know more about the listeners' thoughts on things. Granted, we are talking about doing a question and answer episode coming up later this summer before season 2 comes out, but also just in general, we always love to hear the thoughts and comments of our listeners, and sometimes that can, and many times in this case, can help us develop this show in a way that suits your desires a little bit more. But what are your favorite moments? I think Owen had said, we always think every new episode is our next favorite, and maybe you've got favorites that you like that aren't that way. But if you do have favorites, if you have favorite characters that you hate, if there's things that we do that you don't like, let us know. And again, I said I'll go to each individual person here to ask for, maybe think of 1, 2, or 3 things that you would like to know from the listeners in terms of that kind of thing. Go ahead, Patrick.
Well, there's a couple different things. One thing is that I'm curious about which characters you found to be the most relatable in your everyday life, how you relate to them. What characters probably seemed the scariest to you would be interesting for me to know. And yeah, this is just marking me as some sort of sadist, but what characters made you this? What plot points even made you the saddest? I'm kind of curious. I'm just curious about emotionally how you related to what the story we made and stuff overall.
Those are really good questions.
Yeah, they are.
I don't have any that good. As I mentioned, either in this episode or the previous, because I don't remember, we originally thought we were going to have some guest writers. We wanted to have a wide array of storytelling styles and perspectives, and just any kind of thing you could integrate into the viewpoint of any given story. We wanted to be really broad in that sense, and that we'll continue with this kind of thing later a little bit, but. As it happens, this story has so far come from, the three of us. And is there anything that, especially in this suburban life, this setting, and dealing with, this kind of intergenerational themes and the type of storytelling and monster that we're setting up, and the setting and themes that we're dealing with, is there anything that we have absolutely missed the mark on, that we have totally ignored, that was quintessential to you, or that was really important to you in this kind of a setting? Because our experiences are our experiences. We've had Bob's traveled to Africa, and we've had there are things that we know, and there's a whole lot in this world that we don't know. And are we missing anything important that would have made this story that much more real for you? I guess is my main question.
That's good.
Yeah, and I think the points that I have come directly off of each one of the points that each of you brought up. And I'll start with the one that Owen just talked about, because I think I will forget that easier if I don't start there. And that is just, are there like cultural aspects? Are there population specific things, like whether it's like transgender, LGBTQ, specific ethnicity, whatever, groups, perspectives, anything like that we are not portraying? This is something that we're going to get into here in a minute a little bit more specifically. But that we're portraying poorly, anything like that is just inappropriate, just not the best way to show it, or not shown at all, that you think would be. Reach out to us and let us know. We'd love to have a discussion with you about how we can kind of bring that aspect to light. And then the other portion would be basically, I don't know if it does differ from what Patrick brought up, but specific characters that you like or dislike. And then, specifically moments that you've had really emotional reactions, regardless of what that is. Joy, laughter, sadness, hatred, despair, whatever the case may be. If there are things that have come up that have been very emotionally, that have involved your mind in some way, very emotionally, let us know. I'm very curious what those would be, so that we can kind of have a better understanding of what we're doing to bring that out, whether it's good or bad. Our perspectives are what they are, our own individual perspectives, and we don't know anything outside of them. And we have a group of people here. We're all three relatively close to middle-aged white males from Midwest United States, and that is the perspective that we have. It struck me as really important and moving, I think, in one of the first meetings that we had as this team, that Patrick, you brought up, I am not going to allow us at any point in this production to forget the fact that we are three white males doing this, because we need to keep that in the forefront of our minds, that we, number one, might portray something that is completely inaccurate because of that perspective. And number two, might need to recognize as soon as possible that we need some other perspectives to come into this, or at least utilize them in our editing process, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So that we are showing some of these other avenues.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add that we're not looking to write the perspectives of other cultures and other people of diversity and stuff. That's not right. We're not interested in doing that. We're interested in bringing writers on to do that, but not to. We're not going to implement our points of view onto those characters or anything. That's not what we're about.
Right. And that kind of comes into play too with what we, I don't know exactly how it fits with this, but it does. We originally, the week of the murder of George Floyd, which took place in the state that we reside, we're going to take like a week or more off. I mean, things here changed very rapidly, and things became very polarized and heated very quickly throughout our community. And we didn't even really know how to handle anything or know how things were going to flesh out. Like,
right
as that was happening, we reached out to the listeners through Twitter and a couple of other ways, and just asked, what their thoughts were, or what your thoughts were. And we got the responses that we got were surprising in that they told us, like, no, you should do a show this week, because like everything that we see is very real and dark, and like it essentially is like provides us somewhat of an escape. And I'm still conflicted on that personally, like,
yeah,
because it escapism can be nice in a way, can give people a breath of fresh air and an ability to like sit back and relax from dark and negative, horrible things that are going on in the world. But at the same time, it also takes away from that in any, sometimes in positive ways that fuel can be utilized to make change. So it was a difficult decision. We went back and forth for like 4 or 5 days before we decided to do a show that week.
And yeah, kind of going off of that, and kind of to sort of summarize what we're saying, I feel like we just didn't know what to do. Yeah. Like we just we didn't know, and
this is why we asked.
Yeah, and we had an episode lined up, and we decided to release it, but that in no way diminishes the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police. My goodness. And I, for one, don't know what to do in that situation, and I don't feel like I should even know. Like I'm from a point of privilege per se. I'm not from a point of realism to the situation. So I just want to, to mention that we released the story because we wanted the audience to have it if they wanted it in that moment. But
the last thing we wanted was, okay, here's life as usual, and this is how everything ought to be, and everything's fine. That's the opposite of what we want. It's that in these moments, if you have a voice, no matter what that voice is, ours is a fictional voice, but by all means, this is not a time to be silent. This is not a time to roll over and ignore your obligation to the audience you have. And we're not an overtly political, or activist story, but we all agree that, yeah, a lot of elements of society and systemic, there's a lot of bullshit out there, and life should and could be better. Yeah. And we reflect that in different ways. We're not our stories aren't about the protesters. They're about the average people in these suburbs. They're not about the heroes fighting for change in our courts and in our corporations and in our government. They're stories of people in the burbs dealing with this different kind of chaos. Again, we're privileged individuals, and we appreciate what we have and the platform we have, and we think everybody ought to have it. Obviously, I mean, a human being asks to be treated as a human being, we're on the side of, well, duh, yeah, you should. And it's disgusting that there's a segment of humanity that says, nah, let's treat you as something lesser. Like, really?
Mhm.
This is honestly something that exists in the world that
needs to even be debated.
that's abhorrent to all of us. But
Right. I think our story kind of speaks for itself, and it does, from what we can do from our point of view, it does explore what is actually happening to people in situations and what people's motivations are. And we are trying to ask the hard questions with our characters. So we want writers, guest writers, and we're still working on integrating that in. We've got a lot of story to tell, and there's not a lot of space, but we definitely want to open the door to other writers and of different backgrounds, celebrating diversity and not shutting the door on anyone's voice per se. It's really important for us to have writers represent the people that they deserve to represent, not us all the time.
Yeah, like a realistic representation of the
Right.
community. Right.
Yeah, and because our communities are diverse, and that diversity should be celebrated, and we want to do that with our guest author program on Hidden Oaks.
And that's like, we go back to the first story where the tween kids are calling each other faggot and doing these things that are it's not okay, this type of name calling and stuff like that. But we want to represent the 90s. We want to represent suburbia. We want to represent reality. Yes, this is a work of fiction, and yes, this is a monster story, but we want this to reflect relatable experiences, and we want this to be something that is able to connect with people, both for the nostalgic value and for the storytelling value. There's a lot we can learn by looking back only 20 years to see, oh, wow, we really didn't have a good handle on this or that at that point as a society.
Mm-hmm.
Or,
Right.
oh, wow, we actually still had a future. We were talking about the year 2000 like things could get better, and we have no such stuff now.
Right.
We want to evoke all of that. We want to bring up the good and the bad and the ugly of the 90s, the burbs, and the fictional monsters. These are the stories we want to tell.
Ennio Morricone just died this week. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Oh yeah,
soundtrack
yep.
Oh,
Just saying. You're the one that brought it up.
See, and these are the things I don't know that everybody else around me knows and assumes that I do, and then I seem especially.
I think I saw your post about it, Bob. Yeah,
okay. Yeah.
And like I heard some of his music played on NPR and stuff.
Yeah, no, and I'm over here completely clueless.
Anyway, that pretty much does it, I think, for the rest of our behind the scenes episode here this summer. We are not going to be like publicly saying when season 2 is going to be dropping here. So
right.
sorry to do that to you. But just expect it sometime end of summer, early fall. We're working on it. We're going to just get a little bit further ahead before we start to put that stuff out to you guys. So anyway, in the meantime, there will have been this 2-part behind the scenes. We're also looking to do a Q&A with the listeners coming up soon. So feel free to email us at hiddenoakspodcast@gmail.com or reaching out to us at Hidden Oaks Podcast on Facebook or at Hidden Oaks Pod on Twitter. And then I think it's Hidden Oaks Podcast on Instagram too, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. So any of those places, feel free to reach out to us for a Q&A, or if you just have random content you want to submit to us. We've got the ongoing hashtag #WhoIsShe. Send us some drawings or some thoughts about who you think the monster is. What does she look like? What is the nature of that? We would love to see that. And again, like any of the other things that we asked in this episode, what your thoughts are, emotional feelings to scenes throughout the season 1. And again, any questions you might have for us, we would love to answer or discuss that on our next show. I already plugged the social media. That's what the next thing says. And then merchandise. We've got some really cool shirts, hats, headbands, jogging equipment, various gear that's coming out, stickers. Sometime this summer, Trick Apparel is doing the awesome work on that for us, and we will get you that information as soon as we know it's going to be available. But there is going to be some of it that's limited edition, like for the first season, and as soon as that closes out, it won't be available again. So we'll tell you when that's coming out, and make sure you get your slots in there to pick that stuff up. I think that's it. Anything else, anybody?
Just stick with the story. The monster is super good. You're not going to be disappointed.
But no, I mean, more than anything else, thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate that you're listening to our show, however you're doing it. Without you guys, there would be nothing. And to the couple folks that have donated to the project already through the donate link on our website, thank you very much. We couldn't appreciate it anymore. The website, by the way, that was the one thing I didn't mention, hiddenoakspodcast.com. We will see you guys later. And until next time, goodbye, listeners.